So at this point in your life, it sounds like you had a measure of stardom. Is that fair to say?
I mean, that's what I thought. And so we stepped it up and we went to slightly more widely known artists like Ja Rule and Ashanti. They had more radio play friendly songs. So they were
Mhm.
more world renowned, if you will.
Yep.
So once we started doing shows with them and got a couple tour dates with them out of state, not just in the state of Massachusetts, able to gain momentum, and it went from 3 to 5,000 people to crowds of 20 to 25,000.
Wow.
Open your eyes.
Look deeper.
I said I'm sad.
Hi, this is the Nothing Is As It Seems podcast. This is episode 12. My name is Mark. Welcome to the show. This one is a little bit off the beaten path. We're not talking conspiracy. We're not talking Mandela effect. We're really not talking overtly, at least, Christianity, although I believe there are certainly some Christian values that are present here. And I'm going to just explain the overview because it's a kind of an interesting story. The gentleman that I'm interviewing, the artist formerly known as Lef, we'll call him. And I've known him for a few years, and over the years, I've gotten more and more friendly with him to the point where now I would actually call him a friend. But it's an interesting kind of friend because we don't have time to be friends. So picture that. I'm going to tell you what I like about this guy. I would call him counterculture, but not in a way that you would normally picture. Think about the world we live in. Everything is self-promotion. It's likes. It often boils down to how outrageous and outlandish can I be? It's like an escalation of outlandishness in order to get attention and in order to get noticed. Now, Left kind of turns that on its head because he's very unassuming. He's on the quieter side, but yet at the same time, he's very friendly. So you ever hear the expression putting on airs? There's none of that with Left. And I think that's one of the things that I like about him. Now, on the other hand, there's also an aspect to him. There's what I would call a quiet confidence. Or I don't know if confidence would even be the right word, but this is someone that's not a pushover. You're not going to be able to run him over. So he's not being quiet and he's not being unassuming because he's afraid, which is very common in this world as well. I would say he knows who he is, and he's not going to exaggerate. He's not going to pump his own tires for attention. And if anything, he values his privacy. So attention is something that he doesn't want, which is also counterculture in today's world. His story is very much something that's against the grain, especially in our circles, because, we're taught that the Illuminati controls all music, and we've heard the stories of Laurel Canyon and what have you, but this is somebody that was self-made, really. And could it happen in today's world? I tend to think no. He tends to think yes. I'll let you be the judge of that. But it's pretty amazing to me that someone at that age, A, could do it, and then B, once they made it, would voluntarily choose to walk away from it. And I think the vast majority of people out there wouldn't walk away once they made it. I don't know if I'd be able to walk away once I made it. That was one of the things that really interested me about the story. Now, after I interviewed him, I sat on this for a little while and I sent out messages delaying it. I just didn't know. It's not my sandbox. And I didn't do a very good job with the interview. I'm not a very good interviewer. I have a lot to learn. I got to improve. I was trying to keep up with them during the interview. So as much as I tried to ruin it, though, as I listened to it again, I found myself being re-sucked back into the story. And I said, I have to go with this because as much as the bad guys want to tell us that everybody out there is completely selfish and out for themselves, there are some diamonds in the rough. And I believe Lef is one of those diamonds in the rough. So here we go. Special guest and my good friend Lef joins us on the Nothing Is As It Seems podcast. Lef is someone that I know in the real world, so to speak. I'm not going to tell you how I know him, but it's someone I speak to on a regular basis. However, we don't often have a long time to speak because I think we're both really busy. When I finally had the opportunity to do so, I found his story to be completely fascinating. I think you're going to find his story to be fascinating as well. Lef, how are you today?
I'm well, Mark. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you having me on your show today.
So your story is one of a musician that rose to stardom and then walked away from the life. How did you get started with your music?
Honestly, Mark, I started rapping more freestyling between the ages of 8 and 12 years old. I saw some of the younger rap groups at the time and solo artists watching videos on BET Rap City and Yo MTV Raps in the early 90s. That really inspired me to really make my own music, and to come out on my own as an artist.
How did you know at such a young age what to do, what to say, how to go about doing it? Did someone teach you? Did you learn on your own? How did that work?
Well, freestyling, the whole concept is for that to be completely improvisational, you know? So I started taking it more seriously, after 12 years old, constructing actual songs and verses with hooks and trying to master my craft. I got some very basic production and recording equipment. I went from using other people's beats into making my own. And honestly, from there, I connected with other artists in the area and we started making mixtapes in the high school timeframe. And I was able to take these connections that I made and later turned it around into renting local venues and throwing shows and events around the area. We designed and made our own flyers for the shows to advertise for these events. Had a really decent turnout every time because we charged at the door. That allowed us to pay the DJ, and the venue, and we used the money that we got to throw the next show.
All right. Well, let's back up for a second. You said that you
Sure.
started constructing hooks and beats. Now, listen, I don't know a lot about music. I mean, I like to listen to it, but I have no musical talent. I'm sure some of the people listening probably are in the same boat as me. What is
Gotcha.
a hook? What is a beat? How do you how'd you know how to do it? How'd you do it? Can you go elaborate a little bit more on that?
Honestly, like I said, I saw, the other artists that were around my age bracket, and it really inspired me to come up with something on my own. I was definitely inspired by a lot of the different artists, so that helped me grab my top 5 favorite artists and try to, have a melting pot of between my own style mixed in with all the ones that really inspired me. At which point in that era, Mark, it really, had a lot to choose from. Now, when you ask me about the beats, when I talk
Yes.
about in-house production, I was able to go from using another artist on, say, if they released an extended single of their hit song. On that extended single, they would list the instrumental. So you would have the ability to kind of do a karaoke of their music over it, or even write your own.
Were
So
these tapes? Were these CDs? I mean,
yeah, at the
how
time it
did
was
you
cassettes, CDs, alike. Depending on where you could get the instrumentals, that was the main focus to a lot of artists at the time, you know. So that made me want to purchase, some basic production equipment. So I grabbed, a Yamaha keyboard at the time and was able to make my own beats. So therefore, I didn't have to use other people's production and make it like actually my own individual music with my style. Obviously gaining inspiration off of those artists and groups.
so you're 8 years old, you're 9 years old, you're 10 years old. Did you have any idea that you were going to be any good at this? Did you realize that you had the talent to make it?
I mean, it was something that I was honestly trying to impress my older brother with, seeing how interested and how in tune he was with the music that was coming out at that time frame. I definitely wanted to master my craft. So I decided to start taking it more serious.
What did you taking music more serious look like, and when did that start?
Okay. So aside from freestyling, which is really the art of improvisation, you know, coming up with lyrics on the spot versus taking it more serious, actually constructing a song with the verse itself, so a 16 bar verse, along with the hook or the chorus line of any song, you know, trying to master that craft. I got some basic production and recording equipment, Mark, and I went from using other people's beats and started to make my own when I got the Yamaha DJ X, is what they called it at the time.
You say 16 bar. What is that, and how did you learn how to do it and become proficient at it?
Well, as I stated, watching some of the artists buying their CDs at the time or the tapes, when it was that era, you really listen to the song, the duration between when the introduction, when the beat comes out, when the beat drops and the artist starts getting into the verse itself, and how it really transitions into that chorus line, and how the chorus line is actually the climax of any song, you know? So the
Hmm.
structure itself is really what I needed to hone in on and figure out how I can do that, a little bit more professionally. So from there, Mark, I went and connected with other artists who had the same aspirations as me in the area. We started making mixtapes in the high school time frame.
When did you start sharing your music with others, and what did that look like?
Well, again, let me elaborate on selling mixtapes in high school. So we would literally take a karaoke machine with a blend of my production in addition to other, popular songs at the time, and constructing our own songs and different hooks over them. And we ended up selling these in high school. And those connections that I made, Mark, later turned around into, you know, us looking to perform, when we
You say
needed
you sold them in high school. Who did you sell them to?
to the other students, whether it be a $3 to $5 tape sale, it was just more or less our way to try to let people know what we were doing, let them know how serious we were taking it. And there weren't too many people that were really trying to push a product at that point in the high school, as far as any bands or anything like that. So we kind of lucked out with the tapes that we were able to sell, you know?
And were you able to establish a following? I mean, we're talking about 15, 16-year-old kids here. You were able to establish a following at that age?
Exactly. At least at that time frame, I took these friends and the connections that I made, and we started renting out local venues to throw our own shows and events. We took our abilities to design or make flyers, just through graffiti design, and try to advertise for these events. And we actually had a decent turnout every time. We charged at the door, which allowed us to really kind of pay artists and the DJ itself, and pretty much pay for the next venue where we were going to throw the next show. So
Now, I find this part of your story to be one of the more fascinating aspects. So you're in high school. What, juniors, freshman, sophomore? What year of high school?
sophomore leading into junior year. So honestly, we had a friend that was 18 that helped us rent out these venues, and he happened to be the DJ. So not only did he have that ability, but he was also of age to help us with that rental process.
And when you showed up to these establishments, the owners, they didn't think anything of it, that there's young kids showing up and whatever, 50, 100 young kids. I can't imagine that would happen in today's world.
Well, I didn't know if they necessarily anticipated the turnout that we actually had, but they were interested and knew that we were able to conduct ourselves in a professional manner to try to work out such a gig to be thrown. And they knew that in this area that there wasn't so much for the kids to do, and having an outlet for people to do original music and have that creative outlet, you know, that enabled us to really show what we could do talent wise. And when I say a decent turnout, we're talking maybe 100 to 300 people.
Wow. And were these business owners also having like adults in there, and were they serving alcohol? I'm curious about that aspect of it.
Well, luckily, some of the people that we had performing, our groups, we had older brothers that were able to help with either security. We had people working the door to try to actually staff these events so fights wouldn't break out. But the majority of
Mm.
people that went really had a good aura and they were really there to try to have a good time. And they knew, and we tried to profess this from the beginning, letting people know that we're not going to be able to continue with these events if fights break out, if there are
Mhm.
people doing things that the adults that are renting these establishments to us don't allow, you know?
Now, let
So,
me ask you this question. I'm very curious about what you're gonna say to this.
yeah,
In today's world, do you think that what you did with these shows and this music could be done?
honestly, Mark, I wish that the kids in our area that still have all the talent and all the ability to make music, and there are even more so, it went from maybe 5 to 15 people later on getting into, maybe 50 people in the area who are all aspiring for the same musical aspiration or fame or goals all in general, you know? So if they were able to work together, network together, and throw these shows without a violent outcome, I think it would be great. And I think it would still be prominent. However, it's all in how you do things, how you explain
Mm,
it to the crowd, letting them know that these things can continue as long as we act accordingly. So we had the ability to make or break it, just like the future generation or the current one has the ability to do the same. You know, honestly, Mark, nowadays there's even less to do than when I was a kid growing up. So
mm.
especially around where I'm at. So for them to be able to have that same platform, they just need to have the same drive to want to do it at such an early age, not necessarily thinking that a local show is beneath them, and really trying to earn the respect and the camaraderie that you can in a Massachusetts community, you know?
Now, at this point in time, you had already been you had made it, you had made tapes, you had sold tapes. Now you're starting to perform. What did you learn about the industry and how did you mold yourself into basically a full, almost a full-time musician as I understand it?
So what it was is I needed to take it to the next level because throwing the shows and everything with the people that I was working with was great, but it kind of got you lost in a sea of faces. So I decided to go from doing the rap group thing to being a solo artist and actually work on my solo project. So I could try to gain a fan base without being the vast majority of just all the groups that were involved in these performances, you know, molding into one entity and created my own persona, you know?
So you went from go being a musician with a group of people to being a musician of one. What did you tell the people that were that were making music with you? That you were no longer going to be doing that with them?
No, meaning that I'm still willing to do all the shows that I was doing just as an individual artist. We could do collaborations, features, but I wanted to come out with my own projects. Just like anything, Mark, when you set up with a team, you have to make sure that everybody's playing their part. And if there's one person who has more of a drive and wants to do more than what they're currently doing with the unit, then you kind of have to let them grow. So I don't think that there was any ill will or bad blood there. I think that we all knew that we needed to kind of step it up as individuals if we wanted to take it to the next level musically, coming out with our own material, not just group affiliated mixtapes.
So it sounds like there's music involved. Obviously, you have to make good music, and there's all that goes with that, with sound quality and production and all that stuff. And there's also the marketing and the name recognition, and I guess the sales aspect of it. What's more important, the music or the marketing and sales and all that stuff?
I think they all go hand in hand, Mark. You need to be able to advertise the music and have it be heard to gain any momentum behind it, you know? So you could have all the talent in the world, but if you're singing to an audience of one, you're really limiting your own, you're setting your own limits. So it really takes a lot of drive, and you really want to have to not just release music, but to perform that music Because say if you have your CD and it gets played in a car that has maybe 4 people in it, versus you performing in front of on a stage that may have, between that 100 to 300 people in it. The
Hmm.
goal to have as many ears hear your music and as many people really follow you at that point, to not only spread awareness of you doing music, but anything that you're going to come out with in the future, to get your following. So I started working on as I told you, that first project as a solo artist. It was called Life Through My Eyes. I met with a guy in Worcester. He helped me out with the CD duplication. I learned how to copyright my own material. I produced about 90% of that project. I did all my own graphics, and I printed through a local shop in the area as far as trying to get the CD printing done, you know. And in hindsight, when looking back on that project, I realized, and you mentioned the sound quality, the overall sound quality wasn't there, and I needed to step it up heavily if I was going to continue to record. And once I saved up enough money, I called around. I found a local professional recording studio, and I started my next project. My first album, working with a professional recording engineer at Eccentric Production Studios with a guy named Matt Fortier. Great guy. He's the one who helped me with that album that was titled Freedom of Speech.
You say that the sound quality wasn't there. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Definitely. So I'm not sure if you remember, the 8-track players that they had out there. That was pretty much
Mhm.
comparable to what we were using for production sound equipment. We needed to take that to the next level because we were ultimately recording on a cassette and then trying to take that cassette and transfer it onto CD.
Hmm.
So the sound quality definitely wasn't there, as opposed to the ability of a professional recording engineer at an actual studio, you know?
All right. So you're now you've made your own music. You've now have ramped up to professional production level. You're starting to do these shows. You're performing in front of people. How did you get to the next level?
So as I was trying to say with the Freedom of Speech album, this album forced me to work with the professional recording engineer, get an actual professional photographer, graphic designer. I went with a CD duplication company out of Canada to mass produce and package the product so we could sell it in stores. I went from working with my same graphic designer. He introduced me, and his name is Jim Paquette. He introduced me to a guy named DJ Tenenbaum, who was in control of the consignment department with Newberry Comics. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that store chain.
Yes.
Yeah. So where an independent artist or group had the ability to sell our music or any merchandise in their chain of stores, and this allowed us as independent artists to make a larger percentage per album sale. Say if an artist or group that was signed to a major label at the time, right, Mark? They received a
Hmm.
lot less percentage, resulting in cents on the dollar, with large advances that were paid to them prior, which ultimately needed to be paid back to the label for recording, production, advertising, and other promotional expenses. You know, we as the artists, we could make up to $8 per every $11 album sale. And keep in mind, we didn't have the same marketing strategies or abilities outside of our own money that we had to invest. So
Hmm.
I decided to use the same printing company that I used for the first album. I made posters, which we put up an enormous amount throughout the entire New England area to help promote for this project or any events that we were throwing locally, so they would be familiar with the face, in addition to everything else, the logo. Try to spread brand awareness, if anything.
But I mean, did anyone help you with the marketing? I mean, how did you know how to do it? How
I
old were
mean,
you? 20?
honestly, I was even younger. I was at the time that I released Freedom of Speech, I was 19 years old. And
Wow.
so I had myself and the same group of friends that I came up with, all the artists went out and actually, like I said, on telephone poles, either stapled, taped, or we did anything we could. And we made sure that they could weather the storm. So we'd have certain advertisements, the one that we spent a lot of money on, kind of laminated so they could weather the storm, literally. So it
Did
wouldn't just,
anybody pull you under their wing? So this is how you need to advertise. You need to get posters, or how did you figure out that that was the way to market your product?
I mean, as I was trying to say, you have to spread awareness. So anything else, why do people do commercials? Because they want to advertise their products. So I knew that that's what I had to do. I also was going to school at the time, taking marketing courses because 19 years old, I was my freshman year in college. I went to a local
Hmm.
community college, decided to go into the communications aspect to learn about audio and video production. You know, with that, I was able to get in the same streamline of classes that really pushed me to try to come up with those advertisements in addition to the graphic design behind it.
And then moving forward, there was a moment where you caught your big break. Is that right?
Definitely. I would say that moment. Picture this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Fitchburg area, but there's a civic center out here, and this is where all the major events in that area take place.
Hmm.
And it has the most capacity for as many that you could fit in the audience as far as throwing a big show. That would be the venue. So there was a major label group that was coming down. They had opening acts that were going to perform. I happen to know two of the promoters, Mark, at the time, Tim Hardigan and Fred Robinson, and Fred passed away a while back, so rest in peace to Fred. They caught wind. I mean, because I had this insider tip, I found out when we're there after the performers, the openers did their performances, we were waiting for the main act to come out, the headlining act. So they realized that they needed to call an audible because the main act was a no-show. They needed to have a filler to fill in these gaps between when the headliner was supposed to do their portion of the event. So they had no choice but to take the artist that had already performed, try to come up with a rap battle that would allow the winner to perform one of their other songs, if possible.
Hmm.
So luckily, since I knew these two promoters, they pulled me on stage amongst maybe two other people, amongst all these other people who came to open for these season headliners. So everyone involved was pretty much signed to either a local record label or a major record label as an opener. So they threw this rap battle, and luckily I came out on top. Reason being is because since I was from this local area and through those shows prior, that same following was there to give me that same type of backing because they were all fans of the same group that we went to go see,
Hmm.
if that makes
And
sense.
it, this may sound like a stupid question, but rap battle, that's kind of like the movie 8 Mile. That's what I know of rap battles.
Pretty
Is
much,
that an
you
accurate
can picture
depiction?
that happening. But as you could see, at which point they had all the local artists in that movie try to perform against each other. This was more seasoned veteran performers going against the local talent. If again, myself and maybe two other local artists got pulled up on stage alongside me. So this took shape. I ended up, like I said, coming out on top of that rap battle. They allowed me to perform one of my songs that I already knew off of this album that I was pushing at the time, and it ended up catching the ear of one of the record label execs that were there present at the show that managed the other artists that were there for opening. I ended up meeting that guy, like I told you, the head of the record label, Nixon Doffy. He introduced me to a guy named Dan Patton, who kind of worked as my agent at the time, who put me on a few different shows with mass concerts. Mass concerts are like, a board of directors of any show that's thrown in the Massachusetts or New England region. They have their hands in it. They put together some events bringing some of the larger names at the time, like Ludacris and Fabulous, Redman and Method Man when they first came out with their movie How High, Busta Rhymes, Ja Rule, Ashanti. Each show built up the request for the next show. So I was able to take some of the people that I was performing with at the local shows and able to take them with me to open for some of these bigger names because I already knew that they were seasoned performers as well. So I was actually living my dream at the time with some of my best friends that I met through doing music. Whether they were rapping alongside me in a featured song or doing background vocals to some of my friends that were dancers at the time that came out for one of the songs, it was really cool.
And how many people were you performing in front of at this time?
Well, for the Ludacris and Fabulous show, the Redman Method Man show, and the Busta Rhymes show, they were all in the same venue. That was at the Palladium in Worcester, Mass, which held about 3 to 5,000 people tops.
Hmm.
Some of the biggest names that you know have performed over there as well, not just the ones that I mentioned, you know. So,
So at this point in your life, it sounds like you had a measure of stardom. Is that fair to say?
I mean, that's what I thought. And so we stepped it up and we went to slightly more widely known artists like Ja Rule and Ashanti. They had more radio play friendly songs. So they were
Mhm.
more world renowned, if you will.
Yep.
So once we started doing shows with them and got a couple tour dates with them out of state, not just in the state of Massachusetts, able to gain momentum, and it went from 3 to 5,000 people to crowds of 20 to 25,000.
Wow.
So,
And what was that like? How did your life change? What's going through your mind at this point in time in your life?
well, again, I was able to work with some of the people that I was doing the shows with initially. From my good friend still to this day, Lee Morales. He was one of the pioneers in this area as far as doing hip hop music. Him and his brother had a rap group they called Lost Reality. I followed them heavily, so they were pretty much some of the inspiration as to why I wanted to get into it to begin with. And
Hmm.
aside from Nas and Mobb Deep, you know, on a local platform, they were the group that really set it off in this area. So I was able to pay homage, bring him alongside me. He knew my material so well that we were able to do all the songs that we had together, as well as he was able to be my hype man as well. So it worked out that he was able to stay on stage with me. I worked with my best friend Heather. She sang some of the vocals for some of the R&B friendly songs that I had that tried to cater to the female audience. You know, I worked with my good friend Umar Fox and Avery as well, you know, so they really helped me as far as the performance with their talents, you know, to really project what I was trying to do at the time. And I got to kind of live my dream with them. So this continued to get us recommended for more shows and tour dates out of the state, you know. And at one of the shows, I ended up meeting my oldest son's mom. You know, it led to a violent confrontation at one of the shows. And that's when I decided to hang it up as far as the performances.
If I remember from speaking to you at another time, it had something to do with jealousy of some of the people that were there. Is that fair to say?
Again, you know, to give you a clear scope of things. So we're in an area in the Worcester County region, and there are so many artists in the city of Worcester alone. Boston, you know, Massachusetts is a small state, but it's filled with nothing but talent. So that being said, you have other artists that are also fans that are going to see these larger names that they're aspiring to be like, and they're seeing another person, you know, in my age bracket with this ability to be able to get on the bill with such major names. So
Mm,
they also felt that they may have been deserving of that same opportunity. So, not saying that there was bad blood or even necessarily beef prior to, but just seeing someone, you know, who possesses the same abilities as you actually exercising them, you know, gave them a sour taste, which in turn led to conflict after these shows had, you know, came to fruition.
right. In a sense, it kind of sounds like the podcast circuit or the YouTube circuit. There's a lot of similarities there. And
Yeah.
although what I do, a lot of us are Christians, but there's definitely a lot of jealousy, and there's definitely has a lot to do with sound quality. And some people make it, so to speak, and some people don't. And
Yeah.
I think that's, and a lot of times the people who don't make it will say that the other person was lucky, they caught a big break, you know, whatever. They knew the right people, they sold out. I'm sure you've heard it all, right?
Right. So as far as the creative control aspect, you know, I was able to make the songs that I wanted to make, not being signed to a label. The independent
Mm.
artist has full creative control on what they want to release, what they decide to have on their performance list, everything. So thankfully, I wasn't necessarily constricted to what a certain manager would say that I have to do, if that makes sense.
Did anyone ever put pressure on you to make a certain type of music ever for shows or anything else, or CDs or anything?
Again, when I met the gentleman who was the head of that label at that show, from the major artists that didn't show up, he put me in a position where I was able to not only go to the recording studio that I was at, but to go to Newberry Comics in Boston and meet other artists who were trying to master their same craft, not just within the hip hop community, but within the R&B community. And one thing that he would recommend, he wouldn't push it on me heavily, was to say that I need to do music that wasn't so aggressive and that was more friendly to the people that would actually purchase the albums, which was a vast majority was women. So the more R&B friendly, at the time, like I was telling you, to give a clearer scope, the Ja Rule and Ashanti songs, the duets that they would do, that type of genre of hip hop and R&B collaborating was at the forefront. There's been duets, for as long as music was made. But as far as, artists going from the rugged rapper to going with the beautiful R&B singer and being able to collaborate both of the musical talents, that's what led me to an audience from 300 to 3,000 to 5,000, or artists like that were doing more female friendly songs to 20 to 25,000. So it just showed your ability to gain listeners, viewers, similar to what you were stating in the podcast world,
Right.
So it was more recommended than forced on me. He realized that I wanted to stay independent. He gave me the ability to work with him at the label, to have to reap the benefits of everything that his artists that were on his roster to attain without having to be signed. He taught me how contracts were written to get some of the bigger names out there. What was actually on their contracts as far as the prerequisites for the show, transportation, whether or not they require a flight or a bus to bring them to and from a certain event, or if they wanted to have their entourage, the catering, things that are completely behind the scenes that someone who goes to a concert has no idea what's going on backstage. Thankfully, I was able to meet some of these artists, but it was at the time, Mark, that although I had the confidence, I wasn't trying to push my music onto them. Although I knew it would gain me maybe a little bit more notoriety, but I wanted to have the respect and enjoy the moment to meet them rather than to try to push my material upon them. Anyone's ear that I was able to catch, it was more genuine from actually being pushed onto someone, kind of my ability to perform transcended to gain the ear of the listener to put me in whatever position that I needed to be at the time. But I didn't think me trying to do that for myself would benefit me. If anything, it would have just been the typical artist to another artist to try to make their crab out of the bucket leap, if that makes sense.
And you were independent, but some of the people that you were performing with, and some of them very big names, were not independent. Were
Correct.
these guys, were they pressured to make a certain type of music or have a certain kind of image? I walk in the conspiracy theorists, circles. Were they, is this whole, is mainstream music really compromised, or is it really based upon talent?
Well, I think a large majority has to do with talent, but as far as the ability to sell and to sell to the masses, that's where it really comes into play. So a record label is going to see whether or not you have your own following without any of their assistance. So do they want to take somebody completely green who doesn't necessarily know how to perform, who doesn't have their own following, and give them the shot, or somebody who's already cultivated their own following, who's done so much with their drive or aspirations to get where they're at, that they already know that the ball is already rolling for them and the momentum is already gained to a certain extent, that they know that them stepping in would only catapult them into, the direction that they want to go at lightning speed, you know?
And what to what degree is this based on image? And how you look. I mean, can you have someone who's very talented, but they're overweight or they're not very good looking and they don't make it because of that?
I mean, you've always heard, when we were kids, the video killed the radio star.
Right.
That kind of surmises it. Does having a certain look help? Of course it does, especially when you're looking at video production, the photo shoots, the different things that someone would have the ability to get an article in a magazine because of how they looked versus their actual talent. So I think that, as you had said, does marketing, talent, I think everything kind of goes hand in hand. But I do think that somebody with a certain look has more of a step ahead, more of an advantage than somebody who doesn't have the ability to sell through their look as well.
But, back to the look, I was just listening to a radio program. This is mainstream radio. It's not the same thing as podcasting, but there is someone that I follow on the radio, and I really like his presence and the way that he does things. Now, keep in mind, this is radio, but all radio is streamed. Mainstream radio is now streamed on YouTube. So even with that, even radio look is important. And this guy is, he's overweight. He's not, what most people would be considered like a really good looking guy. And I watched him struggle for a number of years, even though he's really good now. And he's made it, I would say, since then. But I think it was a lot more difficult for him anyway than it would have been if he looked a different way.
Right. So just like anything, we're in a world where social media is very, at the forefront. So when scrolling through someone's picture on a dating app, so to speak, are you going to go to the more attractive individual? Are you going to go to the one who's the least attractive to find out what their, personality's like and their personality attributes and their overall character? I think it's the same type of feel when it comes to music or just advertising in general. If you're able to put a different spin on something, per someone's look, especially with a platform like Instagram. Some people just follow somebody not because of their musical talents, but because of how they look. So
Right.
automatically that person or that artist group, individual will be able to gain another follower just based on that solely. And then any of their other talents be broadcasted just off of that introduction.
Now let's move forward to you stepping away. And I find this to be probably the most fascinating aspect of the story. So in a nutshell, what made you decide to step away and what do you think about it now?
Like I said, as far as the performance aspect of things, I stepped away because of the violent altercation that took place. I told you that I had met my son's mom at the time. Once he was born, it was pretty much, I gave my word that I would no longer try to do the performances just to alleviate that worry of being out there, and something bad taking place based on something that I was trying to do and something that I really had a love and passion for, So it wasn't the easiest thing, but when it came down to making a compromise on what was within my son's best interest and my family's best interest at the time, it was no brainer.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. I got to tell you, because I really don't believe if you take 100 people that have that, I guess a budding star, whatever we want to say you are or were at the time, I think most of them aren't leaving it. I don't care what the reason is. Do you agree with that?
I do to a certain extent. Look at a show like Squid Game. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
All those people going for the same thing, hanging on as long as they possibly can. You could picture that as like the music industry. All those same people are artists in the sense, in a sea of faces that are all struggling and aspiring for that same thing, is to win that prize. You have people turning on each other. You have people, and I'm glad that I got out when I did before, I was able to experience a lot of the negative aspects of the music industry. Like I said, the creative control aspect, Mark, I was able to have 100% of. the people that I was able to network and work with friend wise and everything. I was able to cultivate those relationships to the fact that I'm still friends with these people to this day. And we're able to talk about these memories we have together. So, grand scheme of things, I was able to sell my music in stores, which was huge on my list, of achievements.
And what
To be
was more
able to
important to you,
perform,
to sell the music in stores or to perform on stage?
they both went hand in hand. I wanted to be able to get in front of as many people as I possibly could, and thankfully, these artists paved the way for me to do that. Allowed someone like me to be able to come to an event like that, get the same amount of people that are all there to see them and broadcast my talents. Because the people that went there weren't just necessarily going to see me; they were there for the most part to see the headliner, their audience, you know, at the same time.
What would your life look like today if you had not stepped away?
Honestly, I don't believe that I would have the same relationship that I have with my son,
Mm.
and my kids in general, because I've had children after the fact, and they are ultimately my life. In any aspect, both professionally from working a regular job now, they know that they are at the forefront. My kids and my family know that they come first before anything and everything. So I'm I'm so glad that I was able to step away at the time and not have any of the negative experiences that I was saying that a lot of people in the music industry that have made it further have had. You see some of the stuff that's going on, a lot of the scandals that are coming from the music industry and the negative impacts that they've had on children, and just the media in general.
You left before you could see some of the negative aspects of the business. Is it a dirty business? Is that true?
It can be, at the point that I was doing things, some of the shows you had to do for free, some of the shows you got paid for. Either way, the whole experience was payment enough for me. So luckily, I was in the era of the artist gets paid to perform. Nowadays, the whole promotional aspect of things is completely changed up. A lot of the hand to hand record sales aren't there. Everything is completely streamline based. You know, a lot of their abilities are based on their own ability to market their product or brand themselves as an artist, and they have to do a pay to play. Where an artist will seek a certain opening position for a major name concert that's coming out, and they are given X amount of tickets from the performer, I mean, from the promoter rather, and they have to sell that a certain amount of tickets to be able to get on that bill.
And what if they fail to sell those tickets?
Then they either have to make up for it out of their pocket or they don't get the same kind of turnout.
Hmm.
So, and they definitely probably wouldn't be invited to the next event or recommended for an event like the one that they had given the opportunity for.
Wow, the law of supply and demand, I guess. There's so many people knocking on doors to get in that spot that they can pretty much do whatever they want to them.
Exactly. So I'm glad. Thankfully, I was in the position when I was at that point because years after, that's when the whole dynamic of the promotion game changed. The artists had to do so much more work for little to nothing. If anything, they had to line the pockets of whatever promoter just to get on that bill.
And do you have any regrets?
I don't. I was able to do every single thing that I wanted to do musically. I still make beats to this day. My son, he does music. He has quite a few videos. I'd probably say 20 to 25 actual music videos out there. He's doing great with it. You know, he has such a tremendous ability. So for me to be able to have all the experience that I've had and to try to help him in every aspect that I have knowledge in is payment enough, as far as everything's considered.
Now, that's just, it's a pretty inspiring story to me, because you were able to convert something that wasn't so, it had its negative aspects. Let me say that about it, from the violence or, the fact that it can be a dirty business, and you were able to convert it into a positive thing. With relationship with your son, you're probably teaching him about sound and all the stuff I don't know about, beats and hooks and all that stuff and so forth. And I'm sure it's helped your relationship with your son, right? In the end.
Without question, it's given me such way more of an ability to connect with him in every level, and that transcends my relationships with his siblings. You know, I have a great relationship with my kids that I'm incredibly thankful for. I thank God for, not only the opportunities that I've had, but the family that I've been blessed with.
Wow, that's a great testimony, man. I think I think that I'm going to end it here. It's been great to have you on the show. I can say that this is somebody that I really like. I haven't had as much time as I would like to talk with them or spend time with them, but I think it's somebody in my life that if I had more time, probably I would like to spend a little bit more time with, or at least speak to a little bit more often. I really appreciate you coming on. God bless you, ladies and gentlemen. Left on the Nothing Is a
Likewise,
Seed
Mark, I
podcast.
really appreciate you having me today. Seriously, and I appreciate your friendship in general. You're a great guy. I wish you nothing but luck with your podcast and everything you do in life, and heavily appreciate, this opportunity to be able to speak with you on your podcast, brother.
Me again with some final thoughts. I think that I am humbled and a little challenged by Left's story. Humbled because we're talking about someone who laid down his life for real. This is walking the walk. This is walking away from a life of fame, money, all the accoutrements, notoriety, and he did it for his son. He did it for his family. You're not going to tell me that most people are going to do that in that circumstance, whether they're Christian or otherwise. So that's impressive to me. That is a kingdom principle. That's how we're to live. That's how we're to practice. That's practicing righteousness, in my opinion. So I'm challenged because I can tell you to almost 100% certainty, this guy is not Illuminati. He's not controlled opposition. I saw We Sold Our Souls for Rock and Roll. I mentioned this earlier. We know about Laurel Canyon. There's a sentiment among people that run in our circles that, everybody is compromised in the music industry or the movie industry, politics, what have you. Is that really true? Maybe there are some exceptions out there. Who knows? I don't know if they kick you out if you don't join their little club after a little while. I don't exactly know how this works, but I do know this. The worst kind of dogma out there is not a normie dogma. It's a dogma among the truther community because we need to look at ourselves first. We're not immune to deception. We're not immune to being wrong. There's a lot of areas I feel like we mostly have it right, but we need to look a little bit deeper to get and drill down and get the exact truth. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. You may have noticed I haven't been around for a little while other than live streams on John's channel. God's been showing me some things and some ways that the body of Christ has been falling short, ways that I've been falling short. I plan on being around more, and I hope to see you soon. Mandela Effect content and some other stuff too. God bless.
Another liar in the game.